In Mark chapter 12, a Jerusalemite scribe asks Jesus a question. Earlier, we discussed the nature of public questions in the cultural world of the Gospels and saw that, almost always, such questions are hostile attacks against someone's honor.
Questions are always challenges in public. Think about all of the times people bring questions to Jesus in the Gospels.
But as we saw in the case of the rich young man in Mark chapter 10, verse 17, such was not always the case. Even though in that situation, Jesus still had to do a social dance so as to publicly demonstrate that the question wasn't an attack and the questioner was not hostile. Mark chapter 12, verse 28 through 34. One of the scribes came to Jesus and asked him, "Which is the first of all the commandments?" Jesus replied, "The first is this, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these." The scribe said to him, "Well said, teacher. You are right in saying he is one, and there is no other than he, and to love him with all your heart, with all your understanding, with all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself, is worth more than all burnt offerings and sacrifices." And when Jesus saw that he answered with understanding, he said to him, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." And no one dared to ask him any more questions. Here again is a very rare event in the Gospels. Unlike the chief priests, elders, scribes, Pharisees, Herodians, and Sadducees, all lined up against Jesus, this scribe is not a hostile questioner. The type of question he asks is one dealing with the dimensions of a morally integral way of life. How to be a morally complete Israelite, pleasing to both the patron God of Israel and to one's fellow ethnics. Shockingly, Jesus refrains from his usual scathing insult as a response, and instead offers a quick, direct, and clear answer consisting of Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5, and Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18, which deals with how to relate to God and Israelite neighbors. The scribe who asks Jesus which commandment is first of all is not hostile. By his question, he is not putting Jesus to the test, trying to humiliate him, or setting up a trap to expose Jesus as an illiterate Galilean hick who has no business healing and publicly speaking. Incredibly, this scribe is honestly soliciting Jesus for his opinion. Unlike so many other questioners in the Gospels, he isn't trying to demolish Jesus' career. Instead, he's a builder. Whatever Jesus answers can be built up into further discussion. As I just said, this is also one of those rare times in the Gospels when Jesus answers a question honestly, directly, clearly, and quickly. Love the Lord God above all, and love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus, like a spider, weaves together two elements of his Israelite tradition, Deuteronomy 6, verse 5, and Leviticus 19, verse 18. While Jesus' answer may have been very clear to the Jerusalemite scribe, as well as to the Markan community, his response is not so clear to us 21st century Western Christian readers. Making the matter even murkier is the spurious familiarity today's Western Christian believers have whenever Jesus talks about love. The problem is that the word love and its correlative hate carry different meanings in the Mediterranean cultural world of the Gospels than they do in our contemporary Western world. So we will have to explore this in the following two presentations. Last time we saw the gospel story of a Jerusalemite scribe asking Jesus an honest question about the greatest commandment, and Jesus gave a rare response, an honest, direct, and clear answer concerning love of God and Israelite neighbor. But as we said, American Bible readers get into trouble whenever they read about love and hate in the scriptures. For modern, introspective, individualistic Western believers, the words love and hate relate to internal psychological states. They invariably entail feeling, emotion, and affection. But in the ancient, anti-introspective, group-centered Mediterranean world, the cultural world of the scriptures, these words, love and hate, involved primarily an external, concrete expression. Affection, emotion, and feeling may or may not have been involved with Mediterranean love, but they weren't essential. In order to have Mediterranean love, the only kind of love you have in the Bible, the concrete external expression of group attachment, that is, attachment to one's group or attachment to a person within the group, is essential. It is the kinship group, the village group, or the political faction group that one joined at some point in life that matters above all. That's the world of the Gospels. That's the world of Jesus. So, in the cultural world of the Bible, love means the value of group attachment and group bonding. Will this love have feelings or affection? Maybe, but perhaps not. Biblical love does not require internal states. It's an outer thing. It's an external belongingness, a group attachment and group bonding, a social glue that keeps groups together. So to love somebody biblically means to be attached or bonded to them, stuck like glue onto them. Thus, to love God above all means to become attached exclusively to Yahweh God, to the exclusion of any and all other sky entities or deities. It would also entail attaching oneself to the group that clusters itself distinctly around this God. In the context of the New Testament, that would be the Jesus group. To love one's neighbor as oneself means to become exclusively attached to the people in one's own neighborhood or village, as if they were your kin, your family. We don't have to guess what Jesus meant by neighbor. The full context of Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18, which Mark's Jesus quotes, makes it quite clear that neighbor meant fellow ethnic. You shall not take vengeance or bear any grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as your group self. I am the Lord. So to sum up, St. Paul's famous triad in 1 Corinthians 13, verse 13, faith, hope, and love, might be best translated personal loyalty, like in the Godfather movies, enduring trust in another or putting all the eggs in one basket in your investment in him, and group attachment. And of course, the greatest of these is group attachment. My friends, Americans are hard-pressed to understand this. All Western people get screwed up reading about love in the Bible because, in Western culture, generally speaking, love is an affect of the heart, which is usually experienced individualistically toward another or other individuals. So even among Christians in the West, Western love does not necessarily involve attachment. In fact, given the strong sense of individualism that permeates our culture is the most individualistic in the history of the world, attachment, and especially group attachment, are just not high priorities. In this culture, individuals join groups, but only on the basis of an implied contract. One always remains free to leave. Individuals join groups in the West only so long as they meet their personal interests. And when that fails, it's time to dip. No stronger attachment than this is established between the individual and the group in the Western world. Next time, we will explore biblical hate. Last time we explored what love means in the Bible, namely group attachment. That's very different than how Western people express love. Recall that American Bible readers get into trouble whenever they read about love and hate in the scriptures. For modern, introspective, individualistic Western believers, the words love and hate relate to internal psychological states. Invariably, they entail feeling, emotion, and affection. But ancient Mediterranean peoples like Israelites were anti-introspective. It follows that their love would be expressed accordingly, in an external, concrete way. Affection, emotion, and feeling may or may not have been involved with ancient Mediterranean love, but these internal states were not essential. Just as biblical love is this way, so also external, concrete expressions and outward behavior characterized biblical hate, the correlative of biblical or Mediterranean love. The Lucan Jesus says, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple." This is one of those so-called crazy verses that scandalizes Western Christians. Don't say that, Jesus. We need to love our family members. Well, first of all, Jesus is not commanding his followers to cultivate a negative emotion like disgust toward their kinfolk. He's not calling them to feel disgust, revulsion, animosity, feelings of violence, feelings of anger, and other related internal emotions. That's not it. Instead, Jesus is calling his followers to do something far more radical. They must detach themselves from their kinship group for the sake of Jesus and the gospel and join the Jesus movement. In other words, they must die to their group self and group conscience. Only then can these collectivists join the Jesus group self. It really was a kind of death and rebirth. Folks, unlike American Christians of whatever sort, our biblical ancestors in the faith were collectivistic, dyadic personalities. Their group orientation necessarily facilitated an anti-introspective way of being. That means that these Mediterranean persons had little concerns for things psychological. What we Western people would call psychological states, they ascribed to spirits, good, wicked, and mischievous. And it follows that in such cultural arrangements, words we would refer to internal emotional states always connote for ancients a corresponding external expression as well. For example, the word in Hebrew to know always involves some kind of experience of the object known. You see it in Genesis with Adam and Eve. The man went into his wife and knew her. To covet always involved the attempt to take what one desired. That's why we should probably translate the Hebrew and Greek words to covet as to steal. Two words nearly always assigned to internal states in our society are love and hate. But to understand what they meant in the first century Mediterranean world, the cultural world of the Bible, it is necessary to understand their group orientation. Since biblical love is best translated as group attachment to some person in the group, correspondingly, hate would have to mean disattachment, non-attachment, and indifference. Again, could there also be feelings of repulsion? Maybe, perhaps, but those are not necessary as far as biblical hate goes. The inward feeling that is necessary would be non-attachment, along with the essential outward behavior bound up with not being attached to a group and the persons that are part of that group. This is what biblical hate entails. Examples of biblical hate include one being negatively disposed toward, or one betraying another, or someone growing cold in love, that is to say, indifferent. Or, as the author we know as Luke states, Jesus' followers will be hated by all because of my name, which basically means they will be shunned, avoided, expelled. Since to hate in the biblical or Mediterranean sense is the same thing as to disattach oneself from a group, one can describe departure from one's family for the sake of Jesus and his gospel as hating one's father, mother, wife, children, etc. Or leaving everything, or more precisely, leaving one's house. The depth of detachment required of a Mediterranean first century follower of Jesus is expressed in the varying reports of Peter's dialogue with Jesus. In the gospel called Matthew and the gospel called Mark, Peter says, "We have left everything to follow you." The author called Luke specifies what Peter means by everything. "Lo, we have left our homes and followed you." Because a Mediterranean person's very life depended upon loyalty and attachment to the family, to leave home and kin is to leave your group self, to leave everything meaningful to life behind. It is to risk oblivion.